Elias Thorne stood amidst the broken bodies of the swarm's elite guard, his simple gardener's tunic strangely unstained against the gore-slicked floor. He looked up at Warlord Kalen with eyes that had seen the death of sons, his posture devoid of the fear that had defined him for years. The galaxy is full of quiet men with loud pasts, and if you want to see how this ghost reclaimed his shadow, subscribe now to catch every chapter. Now, let's look at the peace that existed before the glass began to shatter. 3 months ago, the most pressing concern in Elias's life had been the stubborn aphid infestation threatening the Empress's rare blue lilies. I watched him from the shadows of the high arched pillars of the Great Hall, a humble scribe tasked with recording the grandeur of Ethelgard. Elias was always there, a few paces behind Empress Elara, blending into the tapestries like a fading memory. The delegates from the neighboring systems didn't hide their disdain. They called him the Empress's lapdog, a frail Terran specimen kept for novelty. During the Grand Diplomatic Summit, a Thraxian envoy intentionally brushed past him, nearly knocking the human over. Elias merely bowed his head, his hands tucked into his sleeves, offering a soft apology that sounded like dry leaves skittering on stone. The Empress noticed, of course. That evening, in the private solarium where the scent of damp earth usually acted as a balm, she watched him work. He was kneeling in the dirt, using a pair of small, silver-handled garden shears to prune the bioluminescent flora with a tenderness that seemed almost painful to witness. "Why do you accept their insults, Elias?" she asked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "You are a citizen of the hegemony. You have the right to stand tall." Elias didn't look up from the blue lilies. He adjusted his grip on the silver shears, snipping a withered leaf with surgical precision. Ethelgard was a world of light and glass, but Elias Thorne was a man forged in the dark between the stars. He knew things she didn't. He knew that pride was a luxury often paid for in blood. "I've had enough of standing tall, my lady," he murmured. "I just want to see if the lilies will bloom by morning." The peace broke when the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. Warlord Kalen's fleet didn't signal. They simply tore through the atmosphere, the obsidian swarm descending like a plague of iron. In the chaos of the throne room, as the golden doors were buckled inward, a swarm commander lunged at Elias to humiliate the Empress's pet. He struck Elias across the face, sending the human sprawling. I saw the Empress's breath catch, a flicker of profound doubt crossing her features as she watched the man she trusted offer no resistance, his cheek blooming with a dark, violent heat. If you're wondering how a man who refuses to bleed for himself decides when it's time to bleed for a world, subscribe and join us for the turning of the tide. Then, a Terran envoy named Sarah fought her way through the panic, clutching a data slate like a shield. She didn't look at the Empress. She looked at the gardener. She called him by a rank that didn't exist in our records, handing him a drive that flickered with the ghosts of a dozen Black Ops theaters. The first explosion rocked the foundations of the palace then, a deafening roar that signaled the start of the ground invasion. The smoke from the breach smelled of ozone and ancient dust, but Elias didn't flinch. He took the data slate from Sarah with a hand that had stopped trembling the moment the first shell hit. I watched from behind the shattered plinth of a statue, my stylus forgotten, as the gardener's eyes changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, mathematical light that seemed to calculate the weight of the air itself. He didn't say a word to the Empress. He simply reached into the pocket of his dirt-stained tunic and pulled out the silver garden shears. For a heartbeat, I thought he was delusional, a man clinging to his roses while the world burned. Then he turned toward the corridor where the swarm's vanguard was pouring in, their chitinous armor clicking like 1,000 hungry teeth. He moved. It wasn't the movement of a man. It was a blur of practiced, lethal intent. He didn't charge, he flowed. The first warrior reached for him, and Elias stepped into the creature's guard, the silver shears flashing once. A spray of dark ichor painted the white stone, and the warrior collapsed. Its throat opened with the same precision Elias used on the lilies. He was a ghost in the machinery of war, a shadow that left a trail of broken glass and silent enemies in his wake. The Warlord's elite tried to hem him in, but Elias used their own momentum against them. He was an architect of physics, a master of the brutal geometry of the human body. He didn't want to lead an army. He just wanted to see if the blue lilies would bloom by morning, and since the swarm had threatened that peace, he would erase them. By the time he reached the throne room, the air was thick with the copper tang of blood. Warlord Kalen sat upon the high seat, his heavy blade resting across his knees, looking down at the gardener who had just dismantled his finest guards. "You are the monster they spoke of," Kalen hissed, rising to his full, towering height. "The one who burned the moons of Krios." Elias stood in the center of the hall, his breathing even, his expression a mask of terrifying calm. "I was a man who wanted to be forgotten," Elias said, his voice a low, dangerous thrum. "But you wouldn't let the garden grow." Kalen lunged, a mountain of muscle and steel. Elias met him not with strength, but with a terrifying, fluid grace. He dismantled the warlord systematically, a strike to the knee, a twist of the wrist, a calculated redirection of force that left the giant gasping on the floor. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution of pride. With the warlord neutralized, Elias didn't stop. He accessed the palace's tactical array, his fingers dancing over the controls with the familiarity of a man returning to a hated lover. He took command of the hegemony's scattered, panicked fleet. Using guerrilla tactics that ignored every rule of deep space engagement, venting atmosphere to mask heat signatures, using the gravity of the planet's rings to slingshot boarding pods, he led a bottom-hull mission that captured the swarm's flagship within the hour. The surrender was signed in the very room where they had mocked him. Kalen, broken and bound, looked up at the fragile human with a gaze full of a new, shivering understanding. The morning sun rose over a world of broken glass and silent ships. I found Elias back in the solarium, the dawn light catching the grime on his face. He wasn't celebrating. He was sitting on a stone bench, his hands shaking so violently he couldn't hold the silver shears. The monster he had resurrected to save us was retreating, leaving behind a man who looked older than the stars themselves. Empress Alara walked in, her regal robes scorched at the hem. She didn't thank the soldier. She sat beside the gardener and placed her hand over his trembling ones, pinning the tools of death beneath the weight of her presence. "They won't bloom today," Elias whispered, looking at the crushed blue lilies near the breach. "No," Alara replied, her voice steady and clear, "but we will plant them again. Together." The silver shears lay on the bench between them, the metal dulled by use and stained by the cost of our survival. They were no longer just tools for the garden. They were a heavy reminder that peace is a fragile thing, kept only by those willing to walk back into the dark to protect the light. The garden is quiet now, but the lessons of the soil remain. If you want to know what blooms in the wake of the next storm, subscribe and stay for the regrowth. What is the one thing you would sacrifice your peace to protect? We'll see you tomorrow for the next chronicle.